Today is February 14th, 2024. This is episode 53 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike Koomar. Mike, it's been a little while since we did this. We've got a ton of kind of headlines to get to. We're going to talk about the games over the weekend and early this week, too. But as usual, let's go to your team of the week first.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, a lot of the team of the weeks, if we had done it on Monday, would be different. Could have said Nevada because of their couple of huge wins over the week. Could have said Indiana State for being ranked for the first time since Larry Bird played there in the and Kansas really got their signature win of the season when they got a huge 79-50 win over the Kansas Jayhawks. Look, Kansas looked extremely vulnerable in this game. Don't get me wrong. Not a pretty terrible performance on their end, but Texas Tech shot the daylights out of the basketball. They really stopped and dominated KU in this game. Even led to a Bill Self ejection. He was sick and tired of seeing everything going on the floor. Texas Tech was dominant. They have a chance now, an outside shot, to split the Big 12 title, which we did not think was going to happen at the start of the year. Terrific turnaround by Coach McCaslin here in Lubbock in just one season, and shows the capability that he has going forward there in Lubbock. So Texas Tech, Sean, they're my team of the week.
Yeah, before we get into the, what it means for both these teams, Mike, Houston and Iowa State are tied for the lead in the Big 12 at 8-3. Baylor and Tech are 7-4. Kansas is 7-5. BYU, TCU 6-5. Oklahoma at 6-6. So there's 2.5 games separating. What is that? First from 7th, and 3 games separating first from 9th. So yeah, obviously better to be at the top than not at this point, but it could change really quickly. And I'll say it again, unbalanced schedule. All right, sorry about that. We are back. I was talking about Grant McCaslin, Mike, and how his North Texas teams were primarily defensively elite. His Texas Tech team can score the ball, and they might not have another day like that again, but they're scoring it at a rate that is good enough and sustainable. They are 11th in the country in offensive efficiency. Darion Williams had about as perfect of a day as it gets. 30 points. 12 of 12 from the field, did not miss a shot all game. Now, that's probably not going to happen again, but I think Tech, obviously getting the big home wins, which we expected, probably a lot of work to do to head for a protected seed, but definitely in the 5-7 range. And anything to add on Texas Tech before we start the conversation on Kansas?
Yeah, I think they're going to have their hands full this Saturday when they take on Iowa State in Ames. They probably won't win that game. Nevertheless, the Red Raiders should be back in the top 20 after their win. But I think, Sean, what you said, I think you made a really good point about Coach McCaslin. His teams have been primarily defensive strength teams. We saw that in his entire time at North Texas. And this is a contrast with Texas Tech being an offensive juggernaut. And I think that's just really a compliment to how good of a coach he is to be able to adapt to the talent he has and the team that he has. to get a really good product on the court. Don't get me wrong, Texas Tech could absolutely be an Elite Eight caliber team this year.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I think we need to talk about Kansas even more, though, because this, from their point of view, should never happen. You could lose to Texas Tech, but they lost by 29.
You can't lose by 30 points.
Yeah. I mean, and Kevin McCullar was out, their All-American guard, and they did have the infamous Monday Big 12 turnaround after playing at home on Saturday, but it's not a good sign when Nick Timberlake and Johnny Furphy are tied for the most points on your team. No offense to those players, but anything to add on the Jayhawks?
Yeah, so I mean the Jayhawks, they've had 2 straight Saturday Monday turnarounds, which is very, very difficult. Don't get me wrong, but you look at their last 3 games, an overtime loss to Kansas State. That's an in-state rival. That's a tough game. I understand they couldn't take the W in that one. Against Baylor, they got the win, Sean. It wasn't pretty. Okay, Baylor did not play their best basketball in that game by any stretch, and there were definitely, as there always is, at Allen Fieldhouse, there was a little bit of an officiating bias. You always see that in the Big 12. But Baylor had 2 chances to tie that game and send it into overtime, and Hunter Dickinson got dominated by the freshman center of Baylor, who's not the greatest player in the world, but anyway, they turn around and we really see the lack of depth that they have against Tech. McCullar, who's one of their best players, was out, and it really exposed this team going into March. Sean, at the start of the year, this was my clear-cut team to favor my favorite to win the national championship, but they just do not have the depth. They have 7 guys that they can play on a regular basis, and if one of those starters gets hurt, they are in trouble. They are in serious trouble. So I think a lot of question marks coming up about the Jayhawks right now. We'll see how they can finish out the year, but only 7-5 in conference, not what we expected at this point in the season.
Yeah, Mike, if looking at their resume, they still do have a 6 next to their name. Now, that will probably get worse.
That's going to change.
They do play Oklahoma on the road on Saturday, but they have 2 road wins on the year. 2-5 in true road games, and they do not have 3 straight wins since, bye game season
November?
In December. So, this team is probably not going to win the Big 12. They'll probably be up there at the top. They're still 14-0 at home. They got away with one against Baylor, and they do have until Saturday. And then after that Oklahoma game on Saturday, they do have off for an entire week until they host Texas. So maybe, if you can get that Oklahoma win, then you can rest, and they'll probably get a bunch of days off because they just looked worn out against Texas Tech. And when your best player, who I think at this point, seeing Kansas with and without McCullar, he's definitely their best player. Hunter Dickinson, good player. KJ Adams, good player, but he's their best player. And then when they don't show up, DeJuan Harris goes 2 for 8, Dickinson 2 for 12, KJ Adams 1 for 10. Do the quick math on that, Mike. That's 3 for 22, 5 for 30 from the field from your 3 best players. That is a recipe to lose basketball games against anyone. 18 seeds could beat you if you play like that. So, hopefully they get McCullar back, and he's kind of been in and out. I know he missed one game, then he came back, and maybe he's, if the NCAA tournament started tomorrow, he'd be in there, but not a lot to be excited about from Kansas right now. They got a lot of issues, but Bill Self is the best in the business, and we'll see if they can fix it.
Yeah, Saturday is going to be particularly interesting. They're going to be taking on an Oklahoma squad in Norman that kind of got their teeth kicked in against Baylor on Wednesday this week. Or Tuesday, excuse me. That game was ugly for the Sooners. They got crushed. So 2 teams that are going to be looking to back there. It's going to be an interesting one to watch.
So, Mike, I think with both Kansas and Baylor, their bounce back ability has been pretty good, which from a March standpoint and from a seeding standpoint is probably okay, but you shouldn't have to have a loss to perform like that, and especially if you want to win the Big 12, that's probably not going to get it done.
Yeah. The one thing that I do like about Baylor, Sean, is this Baylor team is still a really young team. And they've clearly been a very resilient team. You looked at that win against Iowa State. That took some guts and a lot of resiliency. And even since that game, they've played pretty well. They had that loss to Kansas in Lawrence. You can't really fault a team for losing in Lawrence, Kansas during the conference season, especially by 3 points. But, I think they've got a very winnable next couple of games. You're talking at West Virginia, at Brigham Young. I think that Brigham Young game could be a trip up, but then you go host Houston, and I really like the Bears in that game. Houston has not been as good on the road in Big 12 games this year. So I think Baylor has a really good chance to get up to the 2 line by the end of the regular season.
So, Mike, just looking through the Big 12 here, trying to see if there's anything. One last thing I wanted to ask you. The teams leading the conference are 8-3, as we said, 3rd and 4th at 7-4. How many wins do you think wins this conference when it's all said and done?
I think 13-5 gets the job done. I think 13-5, you could even get a solo championship at 13-5 this year. Very, very attainable. And we've seen that a couple years in the Big 12. I think six losses, probably a little too much. I think Iowa State could certainly lose 3 more games coming down the stretch. I don't necessarily see Houston losing 3 games and nobody else losing 2 or more. So I think 5 certainly gets it done, though.
Yeah, the Big 12 did their work in the non-conference, and they're kind of all beating up on each other, which is not a bad thing for getting teams with good seeds. Maybe you're probably only going to have one number 1 seed and maybe another number 2 seed, but other than that, a lot of good coming from the Big 12. I think 8 teams are pretty safely in the field right now. You have Texas cautiously safe, I would say, around the 8-9 line. And then you have Cincinnati just on the outside. And then Kansas State and UCF probably have a ton of work to do. But Big 12's in good shape, and I would say maybe a little better than we thought. The newcomers are all playing for something at this point in the year, which is not what we thought would happen.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. We thought going into the season, Houston, we knew how good Houston was. We knew that they were going to compete for national championship. But, I think I had Brigham Young, UCF, and Cincinnati at 14, 13, and 12. So kudos to doing such a great job by BYU, building on the team that they had last year. But also, Cincinnati's a very competitive team. They had a kind of a hiccup against Iowa State. I really expected them to play better on Tuesday, but this is still a really good team. And there's no doubt in my mind that this team has the capabilities to play really well, come down the stretch, and get a 10 or a 9 seed. I think it's going to be tougher for UCF to get in, but still, the UCF's an NIT.
Yeah, they didn't have very high expectations.
No, and I think they're exceeding.
And I think they're exceeding them. At least, they've proven to be a little bit tricky on their home floor, which we said would be key, being that it's, the long road trip now in the conference. And I think we can tie the bow on the Big 12. We'll probably be back next week talking about it too, and a new team will be up at the top. But, Mike, we're going to go into Big 10 country for a second here. Big news out of Ohio State. Chris Holtmann is fired today after pretty much back-to-back disappointing seasons. The AD, whose name's escaping me right now, is retiring at the end of the year. He makes the move. Joe Meade knows this better than I do, but their new AD is coming in at the end of this academic year. So there's a whole lot behind that. Who makes the hire? But thoughts on Holtmann getting let go?
Yeah, so first off, they did say that the new AD, even though he doesn't come in until August, is going to make this hire, which is interesting. He's going to do it before he assumes control of Ohio State. But, it's interesting, Sean. If you had said 2 years ago that Chris Holtmann was going to get fired during the middle of the season for Ohio State, I think we all would have said that this is crazy. Especially with the kind of resume that he built of Butler. And heartbreaking, ends to the season in the NCAA tournament, specifically in 2020, 21 season when they lost to Oral Roberts as a 2 seed. But 2 year finished fourth in the Big Ten. And then all of a sudden, things just kept crashing down. And I even think at a point this year, people thought, okay, Ohio State, they've got it back. They won the Emerald Coast Classic. They started the season 12-2. And then since then, it's just been a complete and utter disaster. You wonder how long these guys were thinking about making this firing. If they had lost to Maryland on Saturday, if they would have done it then, they do it now after a loss to Wisconsin. But disappointing for a guy that, last year we thought he was going to make a jump from Ohio State to Notre Dame. That was a real consideration. So he's now going to be a free agent. And now we got to look at the hires, Sean. I've already seen a couple of people interested, Mick Cronin, Sean Miller, a couple of names that have kind of come off the board as consideration. Do you think anybody else? Do you think Thad Matta could come back to Ohio State, or any other potential guys coming up?
There's a big twist to this, Mike, because in the age of NIL, the boosters have a lot of say, especially at Ohio State.
Yeah.
This isn't a football show, but Joe Mead and I talked about it on In a Nutshell a lot. Their boosters came out for the football program. They loaded that team up next year with NIL. So they're not very patient. It's obviously a football school, but still probably a top 25 job that probably all but 10 or 15 coaches will at least pick up the phone if Ohio State calls.
Yeah.
And they're really going to find out how big of a job it is this year, because there's another big job just to the south of them that's going to open. That's Louisville. And then we could see some other ones, but
Michigan potentially.
Yeah. So, they don't really have a great home court advantage there in Columbus.
No.
For the big games, people show up, but it's not as consistent as some of the other places in the Big Ten. But Miller is definitely, from what I can tell, the front runner at this point. Now, you can talk about firing before the end of the year. You get a head start on calling these coaches, and you can attack the transfer portal on day one as soon as that opens, which will be as soon as the major conference tournaments are over. Just a note, they owe him $14 million, Chris Holtmann, which is a lot of money. And, from one point of view, you could say, well, they bought him out for a lot. So did they buy him out for that much because they're willing to do that again to buy somebody else out of their contract somewhere else? Or is that where they spent the money and now they're going to go and perhaps not break the bank for a buyout here? But Sean Miller does not have a very expensive buyout, reportedly somewhere around $4 million. Definitely the front runner in my eyes.
Yeah. They're nut jobs. That's a conversation for another time. But you got to think they've got somebody that they've already got their target on, that they're ready to hire when the season ends. And maybe that person knows it too. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Ohio State, whether it's a huge advantage to get them, the March. I don't know, because I don't think any coach is coming over in the middle of the season. But it'll be interesting to see what Ohio State has going on the next couple months.
And they've got some talented players, too, that will no doubt be at least exploring the transfer portal. Roddy Gale, Bruce Thornton, Jamison Battle is out of eligibility. Zed Key has one more if he wants, and Akpara is just a sophomore. So there'll be people calling for those names if they decide to move on. But interesting. We'll definitely monitor that as it goes along because, not to our knowledge, but they could have already called somebody and they could have already verbally agreed to sign at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to go to the ACC next, Mike. A couple of alarming results over the past week in this conference, to say the least. Saturday, we have click Saturday, but those are Tuesday's games. Saturday, we have Virginia picking up a nice win at Florida State. And then yesterday, everyone's on the Virginia train. 7 straight wins, 23 straight wins in a row at home. And the Pitt Panthers knock them off at John Paul Jones Arena. Virginia still probably safe right now, but Pitt at least has a narrow path to the tournament. What are your thoughts on the Virginia Cavaliers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Virginia, I still think they're pretty bad conference. The one game that I did see from UVA lately was their dominating win over Miami. That game was truly mind-numbing. How well they defended the Miami Hurricanes offense, which I think has got to be one of the more disappointing teams to see, especially with how well they did last year with a similar team. But if I've seen enough to be impressed by UVA to think that they're a tournament, they played an easy conference, so they can pick off some pretty easy wins, but they can also get picked off themselves. So I'm still not very high on the Cavaliers, nor am I on anybody in the ACC.
Yeah, the ACC.
The Carolina Tar Heels.
Yeah, the ACC is interesting because, Carolina and Duke and Clemson are probably locks at this point. And then you have the rest of the pack. Virginia looking good, but as you said, could get hit by any of these teams. And then you have the next pack of Wake, Pitt, and North Carolina State, where there's maybe one spot for those teams. Maybe one. So this is big for Pitt. They are 6-2 in true road games this year. They're 6-3 away from home, which is pretty impressive. They've got to keep, they've got Wake Forest away, Clemson at home, NC State at home, so they got the teams around them. If they win all of them, maybe they get their name called on Selection Sunday. But another result, Mike, that we didn't really see coming yesterday in the ACC was Syracuse getting the first signature win of the Adrian Autry administration. The Tar Heels go down at the Carrier Dome. 3 losses in the last 5 for the Tar Heels. Syracuse, we always knew they could score it, but they get the job done here at home. What were your thoughts on this one?
I mean, first off, if you watched this game, Sean, you saw that Syracuse got every break imaginable in this game. We're talking banking threes, rebounds off, circus shots that ended up falling right in their guys' hands. North Carolina had a couple balls that kind of just slipped out of their hand, and I'm not going to say Syracuse was lucky to win this game, but they certainly everything bounced their way in order for this to happen. But with that being said, I mean, they were in the game to start with, and North Carolina now, you start to wonder about them a little bit. This team, ever since that win over Duke, which was pretty convincing, albeit only a 9-point win, they've struggled. They had that loss at home against a Clemson team that we didn't expect to see coming. Then they kind of just got lucky against Miami. They won basically because of a lane violation at the end of the game against Miami. They got pretty lucky there, and then they get knocked off here against Syracuse. So, and then even before that Duke game, they lost to Georgia Tech, who's a really bad team in the ACC. So, while 5-6 games ago we were talking about UNC being a Final Four and maybe a championship caliber team, it seems like this.
Yeah, Mike, I think the optimistic side of me is saying that North Carolina just, they've already won the conference and nothing really matters until the NCAA tournament. But just like that, Duke's a half game behind them, and Duke gets to play them again. So if they keep messing around, Duke's going to win this league.
Yeah. UVA's 1 game behind.
Yeah. And they play Virginia on the road, and they play Duke at Duke. So if they lose both of those and Duke gets going, and Duke's winning the league. Never would have thought that a couple weeks ago. So, I think they were in this game with Syracuse. There was a play late in the game where North Carolina forced 2 really tough shots, down 4 with 3 minutes left, and Syracuse got the offensive rebound, took the entire clock, hucked up a prayer, got the offensive rebound. It was just well, if you just get the rebound there, maybe you could steal that one at the Dome. But anywhere else in the ACC, Mike? I mean, we saw Duke beat Wake Forest on Monday. Don't really think anything else in the ACC needs to be talked about. Clemson is beating Miami by 1 right now at halftime.
I mean,
maybe the Tigers get the job done there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think we'll see what happens with Miami in the next couple of weeks, but this team's been incredibly disappointing. I think they really need this game in order to have a shot to make the big dance right now because they're running out of opportunities and they're squandering a lot of them already. They had that big chance against UNC over the weekend. They lost that one. They embarrassed themselves at UVA earlier. And so it just seems like they're running out of time, especially when they have some embarrassing losses like to Louisville. So I'm not optimistic on the Hurricanes.
Yeah, Miami's probably going to have to win the tournament. I'm interested to see how the ACC tournament goes. It's probably not going to be the one that is must-watch TV.
No, it won't be.
Especially, when it's going on at the same time as all the other ones. But it will be interesting to see what happens, to see if these middle-of-the-pack teams can... we have seen some bid stealers from the ACC before. Virginia Tech made it by running the table and winning that league a couple of years ago. And I'm not ruling out a Wake Forest or Miami or NC State or someone from just running through it. I mean, you have to beat maybe one team that's better than you to win the tournament. Maybe two.
Yeah, I mean, this league, it seems like the championship is wide open, especially with how vulnerable UNC and Duke both look right now.
And especially
Duke might be the worst top 10 team I've seen in years.
And especially if the ACC tournament is nothing to them. Say Duke wins the one at Cameron, and they split the series. Like, they're not going to be... They don't need to win the ACC tournament. And that has... teams... major conference tournaments are what they are. But they definitely mean more to the teams that don't have another game on the schedule.
Yeah,
but
very true.
We got the Big East next, Mike, and we're just at 28 minutes, so good timing, Big East, and then we'll pick some games, and then we'll get out of here. The connection hasn't been great today. Hopefully, it's coming in for me, most of what you're saying, Mike. I know it's a little choppy at times, but hopefully it's powering through. Mike, we've got the Big East coming into the year, a lot of high expectations. And at least at this point, I would say that they have not been met. UConn is one of the two best teams in the country. You have Creighton, you have Marquette, who are really good basketball teams. But other than that, the only other team that's at least off the bubble, off the last four in, is Butler. And they lost a tough one yesterday to Marquette at home. They did beat Marquette on the road, but what are your thoughts on the Big East as a whole?
Yeah, I will say Marquette has come back. There was a point in January where we were starting to have a lot of questions about the Golden Eagles, but they've won 8 straight. They look incredibly impressive right now. Are they deserving of a 1 seed? Maybe. I have a hard time giving a team a 1 seed that is not in a great conference. With all due respect to the Big East, but UConn, they look like a national championship caliber team this year. They look like they have a great chance to repeat. And Creighton has gone maybe a little bit below expectations. I think they were initially a top 15 or top 10 team in the preseason. And they've certainly stumbled their way through some games at times. But Xavier has certainly been a very disappointing team. Villanova has been very disappointing. And I think St. John's has even been a little disappointing. I thought that we were going to see a different St. John's team in the second half of the Big East season. And so far, they've just kind of not been that solid. So we'll see, Sean. Like you said, right now, really 3 teams are in the tournament, and nobody else is for sure in. We could see a 3-bid league out of the Big East. I think we'll probably at least get 5 teams, the way things will shake out in the end. And this is another one that there's a very strong potential that you have someone like a Seton Hall or a Butler or a Villanova come into the Big East tournament and shock, get an auto bid. But very inconsistent conference here.
I think the 3 teams that are in the top 25 pretty much have been for the entire year. And I think we could have expected that. It's just the 4 through 7 range is a little bit weaker than we expected. And,
yes,
Marquette does get to play UConn twice. So if they beat them once, maybe they get another 1 seed. But you have Seton Hall, St. John's, Villanova, Providence, and Butler in the 3 through 7 spot. Chances are a couple of them will get in because they'll beat each other and not lose to the bottom 2. And, stuff like that. But them beating up on each other, we talked about the Big 12 being a positive for them. It's probably not for the Big East. Seton Hall's numbers aren't very good. Although they are beating Xavier by 22 at halftime right now. That certainly would help because Xavier actually does have pretty good metrics. But
Yeah, that is looking good for
yep,
them.
Providence narrowly beating St. John's yesterday. The Red Storm are probably not in the first four out, maybe even not next four out. So, might just have to get the auto bid there. Wouldn't put it past Rick Pitino and the Red Storm from doing that, but not a place we thought they'd be in at this point. But I think that's it from the Big East, Mike. We do have a game in this conference that we're going to preview at the end, or actually, it's the first.
Real quick, I think
go ahead,
one
Mike.
thing that's really interesting, and I know we talk about I love talking about the Big 12. You know that as well as anybody. But Big 12, you've got 10 teams within 3 games of the conference lead. In the Big East, you've got 2. And it just shows that once you get past those top 2 teams, it's just not that competitive.
Yeah, so we'll see how we got 2 Big East games to start off our picks, Mike. We've got 6 games here as we'll wrap it up. 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. We have got Creighton going on the road to Hinkle Fieldhouse to play the Butler Bulldogs. Mike, this is a big game. Butler could pretty much lock themselves into the tournament with a W here, and Creighton could push themselves even further up the seed line. I'm going first for this one. Butler came very close to beating Marquette. I'm saying that they're going to get across the line and knock off Creighton here. Who have you got?
Yeah, I agree, Sean. I'm going with the Bulldogs in this one. I love Creighton's ability to score the basketball in bunches. So I'm going with the Bulldogs in Thad Matta's second season as head coach.
Next, Mike, we've got the big game in the Big East that I was talking about, 3 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Marquette goes to Hartford to play UConn at the XL Center. 1 versus 4. Huskies as the home team. Who gets the job done here?
UConn's a better team. They're at home. I understand that Marquette's won 8 games in a row, but UConn's won 12. I'm going with the Huskies in this one. They're just going to be too big of a match for Marquette down low.
Yeah, there's some behind-the-scenes stuff from last year in this matchup that I sort of remembered today. The Big East tournament, when these two played in the championship, Dan Hurley, after the semifinal win, was like, yeah, MSG, this is our house. Marquette beats them, and in the post-game they say, pack your bags, go, time to go home, it's our house now. Well, UConn went on to win the national title. Marquette gets to keep their Big East tournament titles. So I think UConn would have taken that trade-off. I'm going for the Golden Eagles here. I think that it's been a while since UConn has really been tested. I know they've had some close games, but Marquette is rolling right now. 7 wins in a row. They won a tough game at Butler yesterday. Kolek is really probably on his way to a Big East Player of the Year. And you have Oso Ighodaro, who is going to be tough for Donovan Clingan to guard. Next, Mike, we've got 4 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. Kansas goes on the road to Oklahoma. We don't have Kevin McCullar status yet. Kansas, 4 days rest, coming off that embarrassing road loss. Another road game against a decent team here. I'm going first for this one, Mike. This is a tough one because Oklahoma's been real up and down, and then we've seen Kansas also be really up and down. So what team shows up today? I'm going with the Sooners. Javion McCollum gets the job done.
Yeah, I actually really like Oklahoma, and I think that said, Sean, we've agreed too much already. So I'm going to go with the Jay Self's team have a way of responding. I don't know if they've ever lost 2 consecutive games, especially with how bad they lost to Texas Tech. I don't think they will lose this game to Oklahoma.
It's not a good spot to be in if you're Oklahoma. We'll say that. But Kansas, never mind. 6 p.m. ESPN Eastern Time, the College Game Day game. Kentucky goes on the road to face Auburn. Kentucky been really, really poor recently. They do get the job done against Ole Miss yesterday. Auburn, also a very up and down team. When they're as good as they get, they could beat anybody by 20. And then they could also get boat raced by teams that score a lot. Kentucky does. Who you got here?
Yeah, Auburn also has a really big game tonight against South Carolina. It's going to be happening starting in about 20 minutes. But I'm going to go with the Tigers in this one. Kentucky has been so inconsistent lately. That loss to Gonzaga, I think, was kind of shocking to me. And then they did get a good win against Ole Miss over the week, but I still think there's too much inconsistency, especially when they're going on the road. I like the Tigers to win this one.
This is a tough one for me to pick because, like you said, both teams are pretty inconsistent. Now, Auburn probably has a higher floor than Kentucky, but Kentucky's up-tempo track meet style, I think Auburn might like that. And that, like, Kentucky has a chance in this one. I'm going to go with Auburn, but I would not be surprised if Kentucky gets the job done here. It's going to be a lot of points, so if you're the scorekeeper there, you got to be on your toes. Next up, Mike, we'll turn the page to Sunday for a second. A battle in the American Conference. Florida Atlantic, still with the number next to their name, still in good shape for an at-large bid, goes on the road to face the leaders in the conference. That would be the South Florida Bulls. Now being in first, but I'm going first for this one. The Owls have been playing with fire a ton in this conference. I'm going to go with Dusty May to get the job done here. They need the victory if they want to win the conference.
Yeah, this is actually going to be a really good game. South Florida has exceeded expectations. What we thought was possible. FAU's probably biggest game of the season up to this point. I think Dusty May's squad shows up and they're going to get a huge win here in Tampa.
Yeah, Coach Abdur Rahim for South Florida. Give a lot of credit to him. He turned Kennesaw State around from a 3-win team to a 20-win team in just a couple of years, and year one in Tampa up to a good start for him. Last game, Mike, back to the Big 12 for Saturday. We've got Texas Tech going on the road to face Iowa State, noon on Big 12 Network, ESPN+. Not happy that I can't watch that game on TV, but talk about that in the summer. We're probably, Mike, going to give an entire episode to the Big 12 and the deal that they have with TV networks. And
you're going to hear me screaming a lot in that one.
There's no reason for this game to be on ESPN+, but we'll get to that later. Tech off the huge win, Iowa State, Big 12 title in sight. Who you got?
I got the Cyclones in this one. Iowa State, they are one of the best teams in the country when they're playing on their home floor. They got a huge win on the road earlier this week against a good Cincinnati team, but I think they're going to continue to roll that momentum through and get a double-digit victory against Texas Tech.
Yeah, I agree too. I just think that the emotional high for Texas Tech, it's hard to get up for a game right after it, and Iowa State is probably the front runner. I haven't looked at the schedules yet. Probably my pick to win the conference, or at least share of it at this point. So I'm going with the Cyclones too. Mike, that's all the picks that we have for today. 40 minutes, perfect timing. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of Sports Daily College Basketball. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Check out the bracketology video I posted yesterday. And we'll see you next time. Have a good one.